Welcome to today's Explainer. So glad you're here. We're going to just skip right past any formal agenda today because I want to drop you straight into a real-world, incredibly high-stakes scenario. Picture this. It's a crisp Monday morning, August 3rd, over at Valthera Medical Europe. People are settling in, sipping their coffee, but at exactly 7:18 a.m., the wheels start coming off. Users suddenly can't log into the order management system. Weird activity pops up in the identity environment. The ERP system starts seriously glitching. Now, it's not a full-blown catastrophe just yet, but man, the clock is ticking and decisions have to be made literally right now. So, let's look at exactly how this morning unfolded.
Let's just piece together this timeline for a second, because it really shows you how time completely contracts during a disruption. At 7:18 a.m., those initial issues get flagged, right? By 8:03, the head of cybersecurity steps in and asks to immediately isolate several services to contain a potential threat. Makes total sense, completely logical. Then, barely 14 minutes later, at 8:17, the chief operating officer steps up, directing teams to keep prepping orders using the latest available data extracts. Also, totally logical. I mean, they got to keep moving. But then, at 8:41, the director of quality chimes in with a non-negotiable rule. Absolutely no device ships unless its batch traceability can be proven. Cut to 9:12 a.m., complete operational paralysis. The teams on the warehouse floor, they literally have no idea what to do.
To really get the stakes here, just consider the number 317. That is the exact number of medical device orders that must be shipped that very day. And out of those, 46 are heading to priority healthcare institutions. So we are talking about critical medical needs here. These aren't just random boxes sitting in a warehouse. These are shipments that directly affect patient care. The stakes absolutely could not be higher.
Which brings us to this wild paradox. How can three perfectly good decisions actually make the exact same crisis worse? I mean, think about it. Cybersecurity isolating a threat, that's a good decision. Operations trying to maintain deliveries, great decision. Quality demanding patient safety and traceability, excellent decision. So why on earth did the entire organization just freeze? Section 1. When good decisions clash. We so often assume that a crisis gets worse because of panic or, just plain incompetence. But the executives at Valthera, they aren't incompetent at all. They are highly skilled professionals. The real issue is that they're siloed. They're acting on what's called local rationality. On one side, cybersecurity's mandate is to contain the threat, right? Preserve a trustworthy digital foundation. To pull that off, they absolutely have to isolate services. Then, on the other side, operations is laser-focused on maintaining deliveries. They are pushing forward. Both of those priorities are perfectly rational on their own, but when they're disconnected, they become completely incompatible. Because isolating a service might protect the IT system, sure, but it simultaneously kills the digital validation that's required to actually ship a product. And continuing operations keeps the warehouse moving, yeah, but it relies on data that might already be totally corrupted.
And then, we throw a third variable into the mix. Quality's necessary focus on patient safety. Their mandate is absolute. No traceability, no shipment. End of story. But if you strictly apply that rule during a cyber isolation event, you are guaranteeing that an urgent delivery to a critical healthcare facility just isn't going to happen. Everyone is doing exactly what their job description demands, but the overall system is just grinding to a painful, complete halt.
This actually brings up a realization that I think is absolutely vital to take away from this explainer. The crisis does not eliminate competence. It fragments objectives. And that is exactly why Valthera Medical Europe was completely frozen by 9:12 a.m. The organization didn't suddenly forget how to work. Its goals were just shattered into all these disconnected fragments.
Section 2. The crisis pressure cooker.
Now, it's really important to realize that organizations usually have ways to deal with conflicting priorities, right? But a crisis strips all those normal buffers away. Under normal conditions, contradictions get absorbed. Leaders actually talk to each other. Files are meticulously completed, approvals go through their established channels, and regular meetings iron out the differences. But in crisis conditions, time contracts. Information is dangerously incomplete. And here is a fascinating real-world detail from our source. This whole thing happened at the beginning of August. Now, if you are at all familiar with a European summer schedule, you can probably guess what that means. A lot of the usual Valthera executives were out on holiday. So deputies had been appointed. And look, these deputies are incredibly competent people, but they are completely unpracticed in these specific roles. They're suddenly forced into making these blind, high-stakes decisions without knowing exactly which risks they're even allowed to accept or when they're supposed to escalate them.
The result of that intense pressure cooker really comes down to this core idea. Speed does not create coherence. It can accelerate divergence. When unpracticed leaders in a fragmented organization try to move fast, they don't actually solve the problem faster. They just tear the organization apart quicker by sprinting in completely opposite directions.
Section 3. Establishing shared intent.
So, the million-dollar question, how do we fix this? How do we break this paradox? Well, before any further instructions are barked out over the radio, before any more servers get unplugged, the organization needs an anchor. And that anchor is shared intent. It acts as a filter for every single subsequent choice the crisis team makes. It's basically a common frame of reference. So, for Valthera, a shared intent could be something like, we will maintain deliveries that directly affect healthcare institutions without compromising personal safety, regulatory traceability, or our ability to recover the IT system. Now, notice this doesn't magically solve every single problem, but what it does do is give everyone, cyber ops quality, the exact same lens to look through before they take action.
And once you actually have that shared intent in place, you can run every single choice through a practical crisis decision checklist. Let's just walk through it together. Ask yourself, which objective does this protect? What facts is it based on? Which other functions does my decision break? What risk am I accepting? And hey, who owns it? But I want you to pay special attention to that last point. When must it be reviewed? A decision to isolate a server might be absolutely the right call at 8 a.m. to stop a virus, but if nobody reassesses it, by 11 a.m. it might become incredibly dangerous because it's actively blocking a life-saving shipment. Crisis decisions have expiration dates, folks.
Section 4. Connecting resilience disciplines.
Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, this is great theory, but how do I actually build this into my company? Let's look at the structural framework you need to maintain that shared intent. This is grounded in what's known as the Ransom-Kick Resilience Model. If you work in business continuity, you probably know these acronyms in your sleep, but let's clearly define how they fit together during a crisis. So BIA, or Business Impact Analysis, that identifies how your organization creates value and how much interruption it can actually survive. Then there's BCP, the Business Continuity Plan. That determines exactly what must be maintained when everything is just falling apart. DRP, the Disaster Recovery Plan, tells IT what order to rebuild the digital capabilities in. And finally, CRP, the Crisis Response Plan, sets up the rules for who actually gets to make decisions and how often they need to meet.
And this reveals the exact trap that most companies fall into. These disciplines absolutely cannot be independent exercises. Treating them as isolated checkboxes that you just review once a year, that is exactly what leads to the Valthera crisis scenario. Under the Ransom-Kick model, these 4 elements must form a connected chain of understanding. It's a flow. The BIA feeds the BCP, which directs the DRP, which is governed by the CRP.
Section 5. Taking action today.
Okay, take a breath. I know this sounds like a massive undertaking, but the really good news is you don't need to boil the ocean here or rebuild your entire resilience program overnight. You can start taking action today, just incrementally. Our source material recommends a really practical implementation using a platform called organisational.app, and it's basically a simple 3-step flow. Step 1. Just start with one critical capability. Download a BIA template in Organisational and collect the initial information. Just map the business objects, the owners, and the thresholds for that one critical area. Easy enough, right? Step 2. As you import this, the system actively helps you progressively identify where the inconsistencies and hidden dependencies are. And step 3, you correct that repository, re-import it, and let that accurate data flow naturally into your BCP, DRP, and CRP.
I do want to clarify something super important about using tools like this, though. Organisational doesn't make decisions on behalf of leaders. That's really not the point. The tool empowers leaders with visibility rather than replacing their judgment. It forces all those hidden, messy connections out into the light so that when a crisis does hit, your deputies aren't out there making blind choices that accidentally paralyze the entire operation.
So, let's bring this whole thing full circle, back to the paradox we started with. Incoherence does not always begin with bad decisions. It often begins with good decisions made separately. Remember, when cyber, ops, and quality at Valthera all acted on their own local rationality, they didn't save the day. They created a global standstill.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question. The next time a crisis hits your organization, the true test isn't just whether you're making decisions quickly. The real question is, do your decisions contribute to preserving what you've chosen to protect? Think about your own teams, your own silos, and your own shared intent.
I really encourage you to take these insights back to your organization and start asking the hard questions right now, before the clock starts ticking. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.